Hey, Ian. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And, today we're going to be talking about some very interesting stuff. And it's really got to do with, the power of music and frequency and its ability to heal and transform our bodies and our minds. And, you do a lot of work creating these frequency-based music tracks to help people heal in various ways. And it's a fascinating field, right? And to do with vibration and energy. And I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Me too. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, so I'm excited.
Great. So I think maybe just to get us sort of started, what's the best way to understand how sound can impact, our body physiologically?
Yeah. Well, I think that most general place to start is how much we're influenced by other vibrations. Everything in our perceived reality is a vibration of light and sound. And so, there is a frequency and we are influenced by that, whether it's the food we're eating or the company we're keeping or the news and media that we're taking in. All of these things have vibrations and they affect our body accordingly. And so I think that is the easiest way to understand that vibration has a direct effect on consciousness. It has a direct effect on the health of our bodies. It has a direct effect on our mental, health and state of being. And also I think as far as our perspective, vibration is very crucial in the vibration and perspective that we're carrying. So I think that all things are influenced.
Yeah. And even if you look at the sort of latest theories in physics about how the fundamental elements of the universe are really vibrating strings, right? That's the string theory, and how that sort of subsequently builds up and creates matter. And so it would make sense that by attuning to various vibrational frequencies, you can actually change matter to a significant degree. I actually brought a book with me today because have you ever read this book by Dr. Masaru Emoto called The Hidden Messages?
Yes, it's awesome.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read it, basically what this scientist in Japan did was he played various frequencies and spoke to just basically different bottles of water, and then he would put them on a microscope and freeze them, and then look at how they crystallized. And the frequencies and the positive words that were spoken to the specific water, they crystallized in very symmetric and beautiful patterns, whereas the negative words and the so-called bad frequencies that were spoken to the water or played for the water had very disorganized and chaotic crystalline structures when viewed under a microscope. And he used this theory to sort of or not this theory, this evidence to sort of further this claim that there is huge power in word and in sound, that it affects water at a molecular level. And we're 70 whatever % water, and so it makes sense that it affects us in the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting too is in his book, he talks a lot about the negative side of neglect. So there was 3 studies, right? There was the positive, and then there was the harsh and negative, view, depending on how you view it. And then there was the neglected, side where they just did nothing. They didn't speak to it. They didn't give it any attention. And they were showing that was some of the harshest growth of bacteria, mold. There was a lot of, it was just really interesting. So it makes you think about us as people, when we went through these last few years of isolation and people just kind of feeling neglected, and the mental health that brought to light under a magnifying glass, where people really said wow, interaction and community and communication is so crucial for our growth and for our stability and well-being. And the other thing I was going to say is back in the 70s, there was a book called The Secret Life of Plants. And when I saw Mamoto's work, it really made me look at that book and wonder what's really being affected in that study. Is it the water or is it the actual plants? And they were showing in that book that there was almost like a semi-conscious reality going on between the different parts of the plant. Like I remember one of the things they did was they took a leaf from one of the plants and drove it like 5 miles away and then like burned it. And they were showing that the plant actually had a response to that leaf being burned. And so there's like a connection in that, and that quantum entanglement almost, that goes on between those living things. But yeah, man, I think it's just fascinating. Emoto's work is amazing.
But that's an interesting distinction that you're making between, the water in the plant and the sort of being or essence of the plant, and how even though it's constructed of parts, seemingly they're connected in a way that would make the whole more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, well,
right, and
like with us, us with our gut bacteria, how crucial they're seeing the link between the gut health and the mental clarity and focus, and then you look at the water of our bodies and how all these different, it's like we have a universe, that we're walking around in, and that there's all these parts that are, facets of our consciousness and linked together in this working fashion, like our powers combined. It's like that kind of that kind of focus, I guess, with it. But yeah, it's just really neat.
Yeah, and it's cool. And I mean, just thinking about like what makes us a whole being, right? It's very complicated because seemingly you can cut off various limbs from your body and still be the same person, cognitively and consciously, even though that part of you is missing. And yet how much of it can you take away before you don't have a person anymore? And I mean, there's no clear answers to this, right? Some people will say, well, it's your nervous system, but it's actually, I think it's more complicated than that. And especially with the work that's being done on how memories are stored in the body and not just in the brain and in the nervous system. And, like a really weird, strange example is like how people who get organ transplants all of a sudden develop, new thinking patterns and potentially even like personality traits. And that's because, theoretically it's possible that that organ that came from someone else had all sorts of things stored in it, even though it's just tissue.
Right. I saw this a program one time where a person had a heart transplant, and they had never dabbled in the arts, and they started painting, and it was this very masterful paintings that were coming through, and they didn't have any training, and they were interviewing the person, and they just said that once they had the heart transplant, they just had this calling. And the more that they dabbled, the more that they played with the paint and the canvas, that it just kept getting better and better. And they were just really in awe. And they asked the person, did you think, and then they went and had a discussion with the transplant family. And the family was like, yeah, she was an artist. She painted, she did all these things. And so, yeah, it was just really interesting. And I think the other thing that's really fascinating about all of this is that, like, the Heart Math Institute, right, if you're familiar with them, showing that the heart actually has a small neural network that's communicating with the brain more than the brain is communicating with the heart. And they're really pushing a thing right now called heart-brain coherence, where they're, doing these exercises of mindfulness to connect the heart and the brain and change the brain wave activity and to facilitate new lower, heart rates, and just trying to get people to kind of anchor in or ground and become, relaxed to overcome like things like anxiety and sleep issues and stuff like that. So the body is a magnificent, system of all of these constructs that, like you said, it's just so interesting to listen to the different viewpoints on what makes us, who we are.
And also the experience, right? Because I think it's one thing to speak in sort of scientific principles and look at statistics and analyses, but really, for me at least, when you hear people talk about these experiences or see them, that's when it takes on a different kind of reality, where it's no longer just numbers and, theoretical concepts. It's like, no, like this is a real experience that this person is having. And, that heart transplant patient, had you spoken to them before, I bet no one would have thought that all of a sudden they would have developed this artistic flair and can now paint and is, much more creative and whatever else was going on. And yet it happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And no one tried to make it happen. It wasn't like an experiment. It was just, this was the consequence of putting one heart into another person's body. And it really just, for me, it raises more questions of just how much we really don't understand about ourselves and the universe and our relationship with it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love people like Alan Watts, that just pose such philosophical, deep-rooted questions of, you say, I am this or I am me, and like, who is you? Who are you? Right? And it's just really interesting. Do you describe yourself by your job title or your career? Do you just describe yourself in accordance to your family, or what is your legacy? What are you leaving behind? Is it, experiences? Is it wealth? Is it this? Is it that? And it's like, when you get down to it and you start dissecting, as above, so below, and really getting into the kind of cellular and the makeup on the, micro and the macro, it's just really interesting, the perspective, that people hold with that.
Definitely. And what's also interesting is, like, to sort of like bring it back to our conversation about vibration, is it's how our interactions with each other particularly, but also with our environment and all the things in it, influence us.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And in ways that I think it's far more unconscious than it is conscious, which is to say that we're not sort of aware of all of these, I don't even know if you want to call them messages or energy or vibration that is affecting us and that we affect on others, just in virtue of our presence and our state of mind and our being, and some might say your level of vibration at the time. And it just has an effect, right? And it's so interesting because I think most people could probably even relate to it. It's like, sometimes you walk into a room and there'll be a person there and you don't know why, but you just get this really bad vibe from this person, or on the opposite end, a really good vibe, but bad is more memorable, because we have a negativity bias. And that's not because of anything that person has necessarily done. They're just standing there. And yet somehow, on some level, you can just feel that something's not right, or it's unsafe, right? And that's because you're getting messages, information, however you want to put it.
Well, I think it's really interesting because, like you said, our brain is wired to perceive negative first, and it's a survival technique. It's to keep us safe, and so it's always really interesting for people who are intuitive and have done the work to kind of live in their heart space. I feel like they're more sensitive to some of these energies, like walking into the rooms, like what you're describing. And I think people who live in their head are sometimes oblivious to some of these energies that come in. And I think the new age that we're growing into is coming out of the information age and almost overly just overwhelmed with the amount of data that is in, a person's daily routine these days. You can't process it all, it's just impossible. So, I think what's going to happen is in the next, 3 to 5 years, you're going to start seeing this movement growing into more of an intuitive based existence, where people are starting to take responsibility to learn more about nutrition and health and taking those matters into their own hands. Because for so long we've been giving our power away to the doctors, to the lawyers, to, you know, the lawmakers, and it's like we're just kind of going along with whatever comes. And I think that we are all creative beings, and part of that vibrational state is not only recognizing, hey, I'm not feeling the way that I would like to, and I'm going to start making some changes with my nutrition or the way I move my body or the people I'm hanging out with. And that's like a very internal bubble kind of focus, but it's like on the exterior, like, you know, out of that bubble. I think what I'm trying to say is just that there's an interdependence. You know, like you look at the sun, and the sun is a part of helping to grow life on Earth, but there's soil, there's healthy bacteria and nutrients in the soil. You've got rain that's needed. All of these things are needed to grow this seed into a life form. And so I think us as people are no different. Like there's things that we have to do internally as a person to grow. But at a certain point, we reach our limit where then intimate relationships and community-based relationships, business-based relationships force us out of our comfort zone and force us to grow. And I think that for me, that's what this life is about, is this classroom of continual growth and pushing us into the uncomfortable, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to sort of liken it to, you know, the growth of a plant, right? Because for me, what the message is like that, you know, perhaps we should consider ourselves as an ecosystem, right? And an ecosystem has many forces that work to balance and counterbalance, and, you know, there's feedback loops and things like that. And it works based on the sort of like principle of survival and continuation. And what's involved in that is a lot of good things and also a lot of bad things, right? Because that's a necessary part of it. Like, in order for you to grow and continue to grow, many of your cells have to die, right, to be replaced by new cells. And that's particularly true when you're, like, let's say, learning something new. That's less cellular and more cognitive. But when you're learning something new, or particularly unlearning something from the past, a part of you has to shift and change, and it's very difficult, right? And whether it's a mental or an emotional challenge, there is forces that you have to overcome, right? And similarly, in an ecosystem, you know, if a plant wants to survive, it has to survive potential factors like drought or flooding or competitive, you know, like resource competition, all of these things that work against it. And yet once they overcome those things, it's even stronger, right? Because of those things. I mean, it's even like what Alan Watts, he had that famous thought experiment that I heard a while back where, you know, because people often complain that life is difficult, right? Like there should be no challenges in life. And I empathize with that greatly, because when you're facing hardship and, you know, tragedy and things like that, it sucks, right? And life feels terrible. And during that time, you know, it's reasonable to say that it is. Like, it's not to downplay any of those things. And then you take a step back and you say, well, you know, if you were God and you created a universe for yourself, right, the first thing you would do is you would fulfill all your desires, right? Physical, mental, emotional, all of it. And you would do that for a while, and then eventually you'd get bored, and then you'd want to do something that's challenging, right? But you wouldn't want to know how it ends, because if you knew how it ends, or you knew that it was going to be fine and all of these things, okay, then it wouldn't be such a challenge anymore. Yeah. Right? And so he's like, the ultimate reality is to be in a position where you've put yourself in these challenging positions in order to grow. Yeah. Because pure, you know, pleasure is not good enough. Right, and so it was just a really interesting thought experiment in terms of how we view challenges to ourselves and our environments and to our life in general.
What that makes me think of is there's a guy I was talking to, and he was talking about relationships, and it was just a friend of mine, and he said, what happens when someone goes through a really rough breakup? And he's like, you know, a guy or a girl, he's like, they immediately start bettering themselves. right? Setting themselves up for the next situation, because everybody wants to be in partnership in some form, for the most part, And people find support and companionship and all these different things. But in order to set up those relationships, they start working out again. They start going through this process of breaking down the old, building up the new, whether that's the body, nutrition, healthy habits, all those things. Then when they get the new partner, they start laxing because they have this comfort, right? And so I think like when you look at that, you say, wow, because in one sense of the word, you're like, man, why is everything here in this classroom so full of suffering and hardship and, tragedy and all of these things, injustice and, all these things. And then you look at the growth that people go through. And then like when we as humans look at another person's journey, like, oh man, how did you get through that time? And, it's like this inspiration for you. If they can do that, then I can do that. And I think like, it's just a huge time in the world that I feel like capitalism has served this point of like inspiring people to want to do more and to achieve things. But at the other side of that coin is that it also has helped people to have this cutthroat mentality by any means necessary, And in doing that, I think it's really brought a lot of lower vibration to the world. And so I think it's just really interesting to sit back and look at the growth that some people have gone through in the hardships that have forged them in this fire and made them, beacons of light, conduits of, knowledge and experience and support for the other parts of the world and other parts of their community and friends and family. And those ripples, I think, are what we're watching right now. It's inevitable. There's a change coming. You see it, there's big corporations getting sued and losing in court. There's people making different decisions about healthcare and medical treatments. There's different people taking more responsibility, learning and educating themselves and growing. And I think that we're at a real big point in time where there's going to be a new paradigm shift. And I just hope that as a whole or a collective that we can really shift towards something that's more based in intuition and love and support and nurturing creativity, that we come up with more creative solutions for taking care of one another and healing the planet, healing each other. There's a lot of traumas that have been created in this last 100 years. So, yeah.
It's an understatement.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because like, there's two parallels there. On the individual level, all of our icons and heroes, whether they be real or mythic, have always gone through tremendous suffering, right? No hero story has an easy path. It's not, people are like, okay, so what? You didn't overcome anything. Because there's something inside of us that recognizes that strength comes from overcoming difficulty, right? And it's not to necessarily justify the difficulty, but matter of fact, that sort of just seems to be how it is. And then you expand that a level up and you look at a society and the growing pains that we're going through, you might say, right? Where as a society now, we reach this point, like you said, where we're at this kind of pivotal moment of change and shifting in mindset. And I think, all of this stuff with COVID has kind of solidified that in various ways. And it is a point where we need to sort of be able to, hopefully, because sometimes those pivotal moments crush you, right? Like not everyone makes it through the challenge, unfortunately. Only the strongest do. And only the strongest societies survive similarly. And, I like to be optimistic as much as I can. It's not always my go-to nature, but I try consciously because it's better than the alternative. And to see that, well, perhaps what we're going through right now, although there is so much turmoil and suffering, is going to create something that's even better. Right, for ourselves and for our children and for everyone else. And although it's not exactly clear what that looks like you said, hopefully it has these virtues of like love and compassion and kindness, and I think strength is a big one too, right? Because you need to be strong and tough to be good in this world.
Yeah.
Like compassion as a virtue. Like there's this interesting school of therapy called compassion focused therapy, right? Which I'm very interested in. And one of the elements of compassion is having the courage and strength to do what is necessary. And so it's not about just saying it's okay as it is. It's like, no, you identify various sufferings, whether in yourself or other people, and then you have the strength or the courage, firstly, to be willing to act in service of lowering that suffering, and then the strength to do it and the wisdom to know how to do it properly, right, without causing more suffering, which is unfortunately a lot of what happens anyway, is people try to do good and end up causing just as much harm in a different but similar way, right? And it's just interesting to think about compassion in that way, where we need strength to do it, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right? And like the change that you're speaking about, and that everyone is hoping for, because everyone wants these things.
Yeah.
Right? Now, how we go about it and how we get to that point is where the sort of controversy lies. But everyone's looking for a better life.
Yeah.
No one wants it worse. I mean, I guess, but maybe there's some people, but like, hopefully they're not too influential with their crowds.
Right.
And so it's a matter of just, figuring out the ways to do that in a way that sort of services everyone in the best way possible.
Yeah, I agree. Do you, this is a personal question, but do you believe in life after, the reincarnation process, like that coming back to this classroom type of setting? Yeah. So.
Oh, no, wait, that wasn't my answer to the question.
Okay.
I was just.
Okay.
So yeah. Do you want to finish the question?
No, go. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Okay. So I think it's going to get a bit philosophical here, which is fine, because that's my jam. But belief is a complicated word, right? And I don't exactly have a good definition for it, because it's hard to exactly figure out what it means to say I believe in something. And I say that because, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, do I believe, if you ask me a question like, do I believe that everything is made up of atoms, right? Like all physical things are made up of atoms. I would say yes, right? Because that's what I've been taught and told, and that's what the sort of general, or most people in the world think that to be true. And so but like, do I know that that's true? No, I don't know that that's true.
Right.
Because I don't know how to verify that for myself.
Right.
Even though I've seen the proof that other people have given, it's like I trust where that's coming from as a reliable source, but like really I don't know. And yet I say I believe it to be true. And so it's like, how do you trust? It's complicated, and I'll explain why I'm bringing that up. It's so when people ask, do you believe in God and do you believe in the afterlife and things like that, or reincarnation, it's a complicated question, because I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't think anyone really knows. Right? Maybe they do. I don't. The theory that I found most appealing, and which is how I try and live according to this belief, is that it's not a reincarnation in the classic sense. I prefer the theory that the whole universe is one being, right? And each bit is sort of a manifestation, a unique manifestation of that being in a particular way. And so, you and I are essentially the same. So we have the same essence. And so does this table, and so do my two dogs who are sitting here, and so does everything else. And so in that sense, I exist in multiple versions and realities. Do I think that my consciousness, as Shane with all my memories and things like that, lives on after death in the same way that it does now? No, I don't think so. Maybe it does, I don't know. But it doesn't seem like what's logical to me. Nor have I experienced anything that would indicate otherwise. And so I think that, sort of like the principle that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it merely transforms versions. So whatever energy leaves the body upon physical death, something happens to it. I don't really know what happens. I would like to think good things. So, I don't classically believe in like heaven and hell. I think those are sort of mythical creations to understand human psychology more than actual physical reality. And so that's kind of how I would answer that question, because I don't know really what I believe other than that's how I'm choosing to sort of live. And so when I interact with people, I try and interact as if I were interacting with myself. And it raises a lot of empathy when, I see someone doing something, whatever it is, and I say to myself, I think to myself, what brought this person to that point, right? Like, why are they doing the things that they're doing? And what would I have to go through in order to make that decision, right? What would have to happen to me or whatever it might be that would lead me to make those decisions or have those beliefs or opinions? And oftentimes it's very difficult because it's sort of evil things. Right? And that's hard to contend with. But evil doesn't think it's doing evil, right? Evil always thinks it's doing good. And so it's a matter of just sort of like keeping that in perspective.
Well, the reason...
What do you think?
Well, the reason I was asking is because that story, that philosophy that Alan Watts had, I think it was something like, basically, if you could go to sleep and dream a lifetime, if it was possible to dream a lifetime in a sleep pattern, you could live 70 years in that, and you could just endlessly do this every time you went to sleep. He was saying, eventually you're going to slay all the dragons, do all the great stuff, like in the hero's journey type of story, and you're going to become bored, like what you were saying. But he says, eventually you will dream a dream of finding yourself where you are now, which is basically letting go of who you are, like unlearning who you are, forgetting who you are, so that you're basically starting at 0 point and have nothing to really base it on. But the reason why I think that that's so interesting to think about is because if our consciousness carries on experiences from these different lifetimes, if we do have different lifetimes, and we carry on just a fraction of information, and there's been movies, Mark Wahlberg was just in a movie, Infinite, I think it was called, where it was basically they could remember their past lifetimes and they had all these experiences and skill sets to pull from, and they would like channel it into the So basically, it's just really interesting because in that moment, when you think about that, it's like us losing ourselves and starting from 0 point would be one of those challenges, like he says in that philosophy. Like, if you had no experience to pull from, no skill sets to pull from, and it's like you had to reinvent yourself from 0 point. I think it's so fascinating that would be a challenge. Like if you had, in like the game shows, I'm going to call a friend, I'm going to phone a friend, or I'm going to do this, and you have these things. I think we have those things present in this life. And I think that the universe doesn't just throw us untethered into these situations. Like I have found in my experience, I've probably reinvented myself 11 times in this lifetime. And I think what I hold is that, at one point I was a sports star, and at another point I ran a nonprofit, and another point I worked with musicians and artists, another point, it's like all of these different things that feel like lifetimes ago to me inside of this same life. And just from doing that, I was able to create change and create that kind of rising out of the ashes. But I say but it's all of us, like you were saying, how we're all connected. The friends and family that came in at different time periods and assisted me, and the guardian angels and the just different things that just the right money at the right time, the right opportunity at the right time, the right friend or the right book or the right movie that inspired me to, keep going. And so I think like all of this stuff can seem so coincidence or serendipitous or whatever, right? But in the big scheme of things, if you think about this being a railroad track, right? And we're on this destiny. We took this karmic line coming into this existence. Like we chose this for our spiritual and evolutionary growth, into consciousness experiment that I think we are, right? Mm-hmm. So basically I'm just saying, like, I think there is a plan in the chaos. And I also believe that free will is not us changing our destiny. It's changing how we act and respond to the destiny that we already chose ahead of time. It's kind of my viewpoint on it.
So do you think that we have free will?
I think we have free will to an extent. So, yeah, right. I think we have free will in that we can manifest. We're powerful, creative beings. And I think we can have a manifestation that helps us in our journey. I think we can also have free will in the way that we respond. Like, a person that's a billionaire and overnight loses all their money and their whole world comes crumbling down. They could give up on life. And this is the free will moment. Are you going to take all the experience and all the connections and all the things that you have at this point and realize you're not really starting from 0 point? You have everything at your disposal to climb back from whatever this hardship was that just hit you, or you can give up and, feel sorry for yourself and wallow in self-pity. And that's a free will moment. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're choosing how you're reacting to that. But I think the data points and the markers and the timeline, I think we already knew that ahead of time coming in, and we chose to forget and start at 0 point. And we have this agreement with Source, that this is our learning experience.
Yeah, I think that's just a logical account of free will. I mean, free will is very difficult to figure out.
Yes.
And it's very uncomfortable to even conceptualize the possibility that we don't have free will.
Yeah.
For all sorts of reasons. And I don't think it's necessarily helpful to operate on the assumption, like on a practical level, I don't think it's helpful to operate on the assumption that we don't have free will.
Yeah.
Because then what's the point of doing anything ever?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And however, I do think that it's more complicated than just being like, yeah, we can do whatever we want, because we can't. That's just not true, right?
I will say one thing, just to interject.
Yeah.
One thing is I believe that there's magical moments, and I think that the heart is bound to this different dimension of magic, right? The heart of our being. And I know that probably sounds real woo-woo, but the reason I say that is there are people who just refuse to take no for an answer. And I think that they live in this mental state and also physical state by believing in themselves or believing that there's something more than what they were told. And they defy odds and they shift and change matter. And I think all of us have the capability. And what's really interesting is that part of that comes from ego. Right? Mm-hmm. It's the ego saying like, I'll show you, you can't hold me down. Right? And it's that wanting to prove people wrong is living in the ego. But at the same time, there's a healthy part of that helps to challenge and fight and disrupt the system that is in place. And I think that we're meant to do that. And I think that it's challenging, it's uncomfortable, and that's why a lot of people don't do it. But I think there is a magic that is in our heart that is connected to this place of elsewhere. We'll call it elsewhere, right? Yeah. So it's connected to that, and we can tap into it. And I think it can help us manipulate timelines and structures and railroad tracks. But I think there's not a lot of people doing that. So I think it's really important if we have family members or friends or community members that are defying the odds and fighting the system and carrying that weight, to see that as a sacred thing for us and our family, for our communities, for, you know, and to really support that in ways that we can, because I think people don't realize like how much support goes to those people that, you know, probably feel unseen, unheard, and feel like they're kind of fighting a hopeless battle sometimes, you know?
Yeah. And it's interesting that, you know, the people who do, especially people who do things for the first time, right? How what they have to imagine mentally or whatever else. And I don't mean the first time for themselves. I mean like the first time in human history.
Right, yeah.
They change what people think is possible.
Yes.
And when we change how we think something is when we change what we think is possible, and we change how we go about doing it. Like I can't remember exactly the guy's name who, I mean, this is, now that analogy sucks because I don't know the details, but remember there was that guy who ran like the fastest mile, right? That people until that time, right? I think it was like 4 minutes or something? I don't know. Or it was 100 meters in less than 10 seconds, right? Where no human had ever run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. And all of a sudden, one person did it.
Yeah.
Right? And then once that person did it, like the next year, there were like hundreds of people doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And nothing changed except that people believed that, oh, well, he can do it, I can do it too now.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet for that person, the originator, he had to have some extraordinary belief that he can do what was seen as impossible.
Yeah.
Right. And then is looked to as the idol and the, you know, marker of success. And yet when he was trying to do it, you know, I bet people were saying all kinds of crazy things that like, it's impossible. Why are you wasting your time? It's not going to happen. You know, physics this and physics that. And it's like, he was just like, I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's a very interesting lesson in psychology of how what you believe you can do influences whether you're able to do something, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where like this concept of manifesting comes into play, because what you believe can happen, it's very unlikely that something will happen that you don't believe will happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, and it does happen. But like in terms of like personal goals and things like that,
yeah,
right, it's much more likely that something will happen if you believe it can happen.
Yeah.
Rather than actually believing it can't happen. And yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that it's 100% true, and it's like comes down to the people that you surround yourself with. If you have people that are saying, great job, man, keep going, you're doing amazing. I know this is going to be so cool to see you when you know, accomplish this goal, versus people that are like, man, get a real job, like give up on this dream that you're doing, like, you know, go do something real. And it's like, I think it's important. Two things in this. One is how important it is as people. Like you with your podcast, you're bringing all of these different people and philosophies and theories and viewpoints and perspectives to people. And they are connecting with this information in ways like you said, like, oh, he did it, or they did this, I could do that. And it's like, I think it's the ripples of possibility, just like you were saying. And you think about like Michael Jordan jumping from the foul line and dunking. No one had ever done that before. And now people are dunking from beyond the foul line, you know, and people are getting bigger and stronger and jumping further and higher. And so it's like, it's just like you said, someone shows that it's possible, and then other people dream bigger than what was possible or thought impossible before. And I think like it's just so crucial to the growth of our spirit as a human race, a collective. And I think it's so important to like have people share their stories, like to know that no one's small or big, or, you know, every story, there's something that resonates with everybody, and that we're all here to live this interconnected ripple and to share those stories, because you never know who's listening and who needs to hear what you're sharing, you know?
Exactly. And I mean, just think about how like one sentence from one person that was said to you at some point in your life just stuck with you.
Yes.
and they might have just said it in casually in passing, right? And they might not even remember that they said it, and yet something about that just clicked something in your brain that just changed everything. Right. It might have taken years before anything actually happened because of that, but you remembered and it stuck with you.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like everything, every interaction, everything you say matters and affects people. And I think, you were talking a lot about how it's important to surround yourself with the right people, right? And I couldn't agree more. And it's also important, I think, to acknowledge that, like, when people are going through those, like, tremendously difficult times, how difficult it actually is, right? Because it's easy to see someone go through challenge and come out the other side and say, I can do that. And then when you're actually doing it in your own challenge, right, man, it's a different story.
Yeah.
And all the logic, and reasoning can only get you so far. But there is something that is far deeper. I was actually thinking about this last night because I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
Is that you can only reason yourself so far, right? And by reason, I mean using sort of pure logical thinking. And you get to a point where emotional thinking becomes a higher priority, and it just shuts off that reasoned thinking. And it's a very difficult balance to contend with. And everyone's aware of this. It's like, all of these things that you think you should be doing, and you have the capacity to do it, and yet you aren't doing it for some reason, right? And that's because there is some emotional, reflective that's happening at a more fundamental level that's stopping you from doing it. And that's okay, right? That's part of being human and growing and learning to challenge those things and actually follow through with the things that are going to help make your life better in various ways. And so it's not that you should just stop doing it or that it's all the same, but it's like, no, it's good to recognize that stuff. But it's like, I think during those really deep, dark moments that people face when their challenge is, really at one of the highest or deepest levels, right, that you need those people around you who will push you to keep going. Because when you're at that turning point, right, of like, I either go forwards, keep going, even though this is, just as much suffering as I can just about bear at this point, or I turn back and ease my suffering, but not move forwards, right? And then you get those people who will be like, no. And I think the truest of friends or companions or whatever it is are not the people who just encourage you to keep going, but who kind of, come next to you and put their arm around you and say, I'll take some of that suffering with you to help you get there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And let's walk down this road together. It's not just like cheerleading, and that helps, but it's more of like, we're in this together now, right? And I will help you. I will try and take some of your suffering, and then you take some of mine. That's a reciprocity clause of friendship. Yeah. But that to me is the sort of like the most powerful human interaction, is when someone sees your friend suffering and goes, I'm going to jump in that pit with you, right? Because I care, and that's what it's the right thing to do to help you be better and do better. Yeah, I agree. Those are some amazing friends, and usually in our lifetime we get a few of those. That's hard to find and few and far between. Yeah. Someone the other day on a interview, they asked me what it was like when I went through my dark night of the soul, and I told them that it felt like being a fighter pilot that got shot down behind enemy lines, because I found it really challenging in my ego to reach out to friends or family, and that I took a great deal of suffering and did it in a perspective of solitude. And because I think ultimately I didn't know if I was going to make it out, and I didn't want to pull anyone else into that with me. And what's really interesting is you see this in the military. They will break a person down emotionally, and it seems really harsh. But what they're doing is they want to strip away so that when you're in these moments of trauma and real life-threatening situations, and a lot of people's minds go blank,
they want when you go into that blank space, that you're falling back on this programming. And this programming that they're setting up is very logistical and analytical. You know, it's detached from emotion, and you're basically operating from muscle memory and operating as a machine. And I think that when I was in that moment and I felt like there was nobody there, I had to revert back to my programming. And what I found was an even harder lesson, which was most of my programming was based in trauma, was based in insecurity and fear. And there was a lot of things where I, unless I had lost everything and went through this dark night, I would have never had to face those sides of myself in that way. And when I did that, I also saw that I did not like that side of me. So I started really kind of reprogramming, and the reprogramming started coming through in books like Think and Grow Rich, The Master Key System, a lot of Yogananda books, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, Joe Dispenza, basically breaking down and rewiring the brain. And I found it to be really useful for me to write my goals down, to write the things that I wanted to put in my brain, and to put sticky notes around my apartment that gave me positive outlooks. And these became my friends, these written words, these messages on sticky notes all through the apartment, in my refrigerator, by light switches, in the bathroom mirror. I was seeing them and reinforcing this new philosophy, this new way of believing on a daily basis. And this is nothing new. This is things that for 100 years people have been preaching and talking to us about. It's about us taking the responsibility to try, and then to see through effort that it's being effective, and then having the courage and the confidence to keep pursuing that on a consistent basis. And I think that's such a huge part of this, is the consistency, because in that same interview, the person asked me, do you believe that you could listen to this music and then that's all you have to do, you'll be healed? And then do you have to keep listening to it? And I said, well, it's like saying you could go on a diet and lose weight and then go back to eating the same way that you were before, and then think you're not going to gain weight or get out of shape again. That this is I heard Deepak Chopra say one time that this evolution of consciousness is not a journey, right? It's not like you're going for a goal and then once you get there, everything is fixed. Like, he was like, this is an ongoing process where it is a journey, but it's not a journey for destination. It's a journey that is going to be ever evolving for your entire lifespan, And I think that there's a way to get into a rhythm that makes it easy and fun, and you can get, secure and safe in that, consistency and that dedication. But I think it's just really interesting to know that most of us default to negative because of the way our brains are wired to protect us. And most of us wire to a lazy mentality, because we want things to be easy. And, so I think this whole process is amazing. It's fun and crazy and scary and humbling.
So what was the point in your dark night of the soul where something changed? Was there a point?
Yeah.
Or was it a gradual thing?
Yeah, I think I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I finally came to the realization that nobody was going to save me, that I had to become my own superhero to lift myself out of the situation. And I think that was the moment, that was the defining point in time where, I just said, I'm either going to die going through the suffering. I was diagnosed with MS and colon cancer in 2011, 2012. And just went through a lot of different, a whole plethora of health issues that were associated with both of those diagnoses. And I just got to a point where help and reinforcements weren't coming. And, it was like you're at the Alamo fighting off the forces of evil. And you have to make the decision that you're going to make your final stand. And I think that's what happened for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the psychological impact of that can be devastating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, people talk about physical health conditions, and it's not often thought about how intense of a psychological impact that stuff can have.
Yeah.
Even if you're cured of whatever ailment it is, it's like, yeah, but it's only one part of it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You also need to work through whatever psychology you went through. And what's also interesting about, these kinds of stories, forgive me for calling it a story, I mean, it's your life, but is that, once you had that moment, right, and what do they call it, whatever, the aha moment or something like that, it's like, even if you have that, right, the road ahead is still tough, right, and it's still a challenge, and it's still going to be fraught with doubt and, indecisiveness and suffering. But if you're suffering for the right reason in your mind, and then at least it's worth it, right? So once you decided you want to live, right, then you can make that decision, and then everything that you go through from that point on, you can justify with that conviction.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
It's hard, man.
Yeah.
Life's tough, dude.
Yeah.
It's rough, and no one gets out of it, and it doesn't matter who you are. I think that everyone is just faced with these just the most challenging situations for that person, right? It doesn't matter what kind of money and power and influence you have. Oh, okay. Hello, dog. Sorry.
That's all right.
Ted, okay, no one's here. Hey. Doesn't matter what kind of money and power. Okay, wait, let me just let them.
Yeah, no problem.
I think Amazon dropped something off or something. And my dogs wanted to, protect the house. But so before we sort of end off, we haven't even really spoken about this music that you make.
Well, I enjoyed this. This is fun, man.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But because you had mentioned that, people ask you, this healing music that you make, like, is that enough?
Yes.
Right. And I liked your analogy about the diet and the exercise. And I think that people, myself included, right, like, we want the quick fix. We want to not have to do it. We want the pill that will fix us. And sometimes there is such a thing as that. But sometimes, more often than not, there isn't. Right? That's only just a part of what needs to be done. And that's a really hard thing to accept. Because it means that you have to put in effort. And I think it can be tremendously challenging at a time when it feels like you have nothing left to give. Right? And you just feel defeated.
Yes.
And yet, somehow, it's possible. Right? Somehow, something can change inside of you where you make that decision or whatever happens and you go, okay, I'm not done fighting. And I'm going to use all the tools available to me to do this, and this healing music is one of those things. And how have you found that it helps people?
So what I wanted to create was basically a soundtrack for healing, meaning that it's not just for the yoga mat or for going to bed and listening to for meditative purposes, but also for focus, productivity, targeting different brainwave states. A majority of the music I create is in theta brainwave pattern, and it's, two things in the theta. Theta is like what we hit just before REM sleep, so it's a very sedative, relaxed state of being. But it's also probably one of the most highly programmable states, brainwave states, that you can like learn a new skill, learn a new language, all these different things. It's just a really highly programmable state. So if you're working with a hypnotherapist, a life coach, a counselor that is trained in helping to do mind over matter and reprogramming of that sort, it's basically really helpful to really facilitate a groundbreaking change with this music and in that context of intention versus the like manifesting an intention based focus of mentality, and then pairing it with the music. It's just like a soundtrack, just like a movie. There's movies that the music really amplifies the experience and like creates more tension.
Totally.
Yeah. So I just view this music as the same for your healing journey. It's just adding soundtrack and emotion and helping people to settle into tapping into the heart or tapping into the brain or tapping into a different mindset.
Right, so it's not going to do it for you, but it helps you do it, or facilitates your doing it to yourself, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
However you want to phrase it.
Yeah, basically, right. I'm hoping, for me, what it did and what I'm hoping that it does for others, and that we're getting a lot of great feedback that it's in, accordance with that, is that basically the music is helping people feel like they're sitting in the quiet of the storm. They can still observe their thoughts. They still observe those old patterns, but they're able to look at it in a different perspective when the music sets in and they really spend time with it on a consistent basis.
Right. And another thing that's really interesting about it is how, because I've listened to a lot of these, frequency-based music tracks, and I do it generally during meditation, not motivation. Sure. Oh no. Oh,
it's okay.
Shush, no one's here. Hey. Chill. Is that when you really focus your attention? Hey, Ted. Sorry.
That's all right.
Now my headphones are stuck. I'm being pulled down to the floor. When you're really focused in, right, and attention is a huge part of this, is that when you're really focused in, it somehow like changes how you're feeling and thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And it helps me just clear my mind if I can just focus on the sound and the vibration. And it's just remarkable. And I've never tried it in the context of like trying to do something else. Actually, that's not true. Sometimes I do it when I'm studying or working or something like that. I'll go for the sort of alpha wave frequencies, right? Because that supposedly helps with concentration and memory and cognitive functioning, a higher cognitive functioning, as they say. And I like it. I found it helpful. And that's why I was super excited to talk today, and we didn't really talk much about it. But we had a better conversation. It's all good. No complaints.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, I would love to invite people to check out some of the music. Like the website is listeningtosmile1.bandcamp.com. So listeningtosmile1.bandcamp.com, and there's free samples on there that they can listen to and check out. There's a lot of different albums, like for pain relief, for anxiety, so it gives them an idea of like what the target is on the album, and it makes it real easy to kind of listen to, and they can make purchases on there. And then we have a program that we work with holistic practitioners, and it's our membership program where you get a new album every month. We create a new album that's in line with the astrology and kind of the collective energy each month. And people are able to use it in commercial settings, have the proper license and permissions to use it. And then they can also resell it to their clients. They can create custom like binaural beats and guided meditations for their clients that way. And so we have that. And then basically we make customized music and work with people one-on-one as well, like a coaching base. So all that's on our website, listeningtosmile.com. And so listeningtosmile.com has all that information that they can check out.
That's awesome, man. And I'll include the links in the description, and people should definitely check it out. And yeah, man, I really want to thank you for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, man.
I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.